Video lesson 2.6. This will talk about American imperialism and how we became an empire in the 19th century. So, this cartoon should look familiar to you. 10,000 miles from tip to tip. That's the bald eagle representing the United States. And you can see underneath his wings are the Manila Islands. That's in the Philippines. And then Puerto Rico is also included in there. And Hawaii is somewhere in there. It's a little hard to see. But something very important happens in 1898 in terms of how we got an empire. So, through the 19th century, we had emerged as a leader in both agriculture and industry. And we also had spread all the way from sea to shining sea. So, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean, we had won the Mexican-American War, we had dealt with slavery, we were feeling pretty good. The United States also saw that our older siblings, so European powers, the ones who, had gained an empire throughout the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries. And they were gaining more and more territory throughout the 19th century. They were gaining more people, more resources, and more power. And as a result, they were becoming even wealthier, even though we were both industrialized. So we see this, and we are thinking that this is kind of a good idea to go imperialize. We have plenty of resources, as you see every day. America is quite a lush place in terms of its environment. So there we have lots of trees, lots of crops. We were very good in agriculture, but we still wanted to find a way to produce it cheaper and to sell more people our goods. So the president at the end of the 19th century is William McKinley. Hey! So a lot of things happened during his presidency that are related to building an empire. First of which is a recession in 1896. So people lose their farms that get taken over by the government. They lose their jobs. There's not as many factories. So this is known as the Panic of 1896. Agriculturally, we're experiencing a crisis. So the effects of this are twofold. One, goods in Europe are becoming cheaper, so people are losing their jobs because they are imperializing. Two, our agriculture, because of our environment, experienced some sort of environmental crisis, so we're not growing as many crops. The other thing that's happening socially in America at this time is women are starting to gain equality, particularly white educated women. This is also 30 years after the Civil War, so there's no more slavery, but there's definitely still racism. But we're pretty much, they definitely have a long way to go, particularly in the South, until everything is completely equal. But we no longer have slavery or a civil war going on. So in terms of our government, that's better. The other thing that begins to happen in the late 19th century is we start getting this wave of immigrants. So culturally, we finally start becoming the great melting pot. So this is when this wave of immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe comes with hopes for a better life. They weren't profiting as much as they had hoped from the factories in those countries, so they came to America in order to seek the profits that they desired. And this is why a lot of Americans lost their jobs, is because these immigrants would work for a lot less money, and they were mostly the ones living in the tenement houses. And so that's why we have places like Little Italy in some of our major cities. It's where those tenement houses were, where a lot of Italian immigrants would live, and they would basically be little mini tiny colonies of culturally homogenous people, so all people from the same culture, so that they could feel at home and they could have a sense of community within America. However, so many of these people start coming over that that the Americans that are here are a little bit wary of how many immigrants we're actually letting into the country, because we are kind of lost as far as our own cultural identity. So nationalism starts becoming really big. We start wanting a sense of national pride to tie everyone together. So, like I said in class either today or yesterday, we were faced with a couple of choices in terms of do we or do we not imperialize. This was a highly debated topic among Americans in the late 19th century. Like I said earlier, we saw our older siblings taking more and more territory. So this is also twofold, which means there's two sides of this. We see Europeans taking more territory to abuse people, abuse their own power. So we see a lot of these monarchies becoming more and more powerful, which 100 years before this is what we fought to overthrow when we fought for our independence. And so these countries that have ideals that we don't like are becoming more and more powerful. And they're adopting more and more people underneath their empire. So we see two options. The expansionist perspective says that we need to jump on the bandwagon in order to be on par with other industrialized powers in Europe in order to truly keep the balance of power. So we had involved ourselves in European affairs a few times before, and mostly this was so that Europe didn't go to war, and so these monarchies were not super, super powerful. So we mediated the Berlin Conference, we opened trade to China, we opened trade to Japan. We should take advantage of this opportunity in our position of power to become just as wealthy and powerful as Europe, if not more so. On the other hand, we have our isolationist perspective. Though we had expanded enough for a young, we had expanded enough for a young country, and so taking others over would go against our American ideals of freedom and democracy. We were not founded as a country on the principles of let's just take over everyone. At least the people in charge didn't see it that way. And we saw that we needed to protect other areas of the world from that power, but we also needed to not be one of those powers ourselves. We needed to keep those places free, and we were democratic, so we weren't going to take over another country and rule them like a monarchy would, because we are not a monarchy. So even though we had opened the door to trade in China and Japan, and we had been the supervisor of the balance of power already, we can remain isolated and still participate like this, and as long as we keep it fair, we can benefit economically because we can trade with these countries who are free. They also thought we should mind our own business and not be like Europe. Europe's asking for trouble by conquering these countries. We're a different kind of powerful. We would be the peaceful kind of powerful. So then something happens in 1898. It's the Spanish-American War. So basically, Cuba wanted its independence, and so they appealed to the United States for help in winning their independence from Spain. They are still a Spanish colony at this point, as is Puerto Rico and the other colonies that Spain had in like Latin America. Those countries were just newly independent. Spain also has a colony in Asia called the Philippines. So we arranged for a naval blockade because Cuba is very close to us and we don't want Spain coming and trying to invade us either. So we arrange a naval blockade of Cuba, and it works. So we also help the Philippines rebel against Spain. So we're fighting kind of a two-front war here. And the war is very quick. It is over in only 3 months. So we defeat Spain. We take the Philippines as part of our treaty. They try to rebel against us, and the U.S. and Philippines fight a 3-year war. And eventually the United States controls the Philippines. Cuba, we grant its independence. We don't want to take over Cuba. So we say, you're fine, Cuba. We backed you up in your fight for independence, so you remain independent. So in gratitude, Cuba gives the U.S. a permanent port at Guantanamo Bay, which you've probably heard of. We still have it to this day because of the Spanish-American War. This is different from the Philippines because the Philippines was rebelling and they never really won their independence. It was more that Spain granted its independence, and not really independence, they gave it to us in the peace treaty for the Spanish-American War. So they gave it to us. And they also gave us Puerto Rico. And in this process of fighting this war, we end up establishing military bases at Hawaii and Guam. Guam we end up taking over because it's very tiny. Hawaii, we help overthrow their small monarchy for native rebels, and so then they eventually become a U.S. territory, which we mostly use for military purposes. So that's all we have as far as U.S. imperialism for right now. Throughout World War I and World War II and the Cold War, these things greatly change who is powerful and who owns territory. So we're going to see a lot of change over the 20th century. But imperialism is basically up until 1914 when World War I starts. So we're going to be studying what an imperialist act is. So these are actions that countries can take that are in pursuit of economic, political, or cultural empire, but they're not necessarily taking a country over and making it a colony. So we're going to look at the modern context of imperialism in the next few classes. For example, the U.S. might control the oil markets in the Middle East in pursuit of an economic empire there, but we're not going to say that we own Iraq, but Iraq basically has to do everything we say. Well, we'll see about that. So, to determine the imperialist acts in the present, we need to look for motivating factors. So why do we want to get involved with this country? Are we trying to, what is our end goal? Are we trying to use it for economic power? Are we trying to get it on our side politically? If we go to war with somebody, do they go too? Things like that. So we need proof that these are actually imperialist actions and not just either mean or antagonistic or to protect our people or for other international foreign policy reasons. And that's it.